Australia is classified as a dry continent, yet it is home to a myriad of avian species, each unique to a varying microenvironment. Among these is an aerial marvel, the Australian Pratincole, a bird that thrives in the dry interior of the driest continent. Characterised by a red base to the bill, long legs, and the long wings. Look, they extend well beyond the tail to the point that they cross over, much like a tern, but even longer. Their usual habitat is in the dry tropics of northern Australia, but when it comes to breeding season, which is usually in springtime, they move south, where it's a little cooler. Pratincoles drink copious amounts of water. They have a short bill, slightly down-curved, but the nares or nostril is right at the base of the bill. But despite this, when they put their bill into the water, often they get a splash of water. And if this enters the nostril, it mixes with the dust. And so they are constantly scratching at the bill to clear this water and mud away. This pond where the pratincoles are drinking is situated in the Darling River floodplain, a dry scrubland environment. 2024 has been a good season. An old man emu has no trouble leading a huge flock of dependents. The dryland parrots, like bluebonnets, are in flocks of up to 30. Likewise, the budgerigars are in large flocks, but mostly down at the river, to the river gums, for this is where they have been breeding. Many of them are still searching for holes, but the flocks that are starting to form are largely made up of the young coming out of the nests. As well as birds, reptiles, marsupials and ferals also came to this pond to drink. Leaving the New South Wales coastline, we come to a town called Nyngan. This is the beginning of what we refer to in New South Wales as the outback. This pond is located a further 300 kilometres west, on the Darling River floodplain, situated between the Darling River and the Warrego. And this is the first time I have seen the pratincoles at this site. I've been there multiple times before, and they have never bred there. And it may well be this attractive pond. It is an ephemeral pond. I have not seen it before. There are dams situated close by, and the dams have trees. But it is only this pond that the pratincoles come to. The trees around this pond are wilga, or small shrubby trees, not suitable for the perching that raptors require. But I don't think it was the presence or absence of raptors that the pond was a preference for the pratincoles. Pratincoles are not perching birds. Taxonomically, they are grouped with the waders or the chiridiforms in the family Glareolidae. The etymology of Glareolidae comes from the Latin word glarea, which really means gravel, in reference to the red gravelly dirt colour of the environment in which these birds live. The common feature of the Glareolidae is that they have a short down-curved bill, long extended wings and short legs. In addition, they feed on the wing. But not all of this applies to the Australian pratincole. Firstly, it is a terrestrial bird. It doesn't feed on the wing. Secondly, it has long legs, and this is why it's put in a genus of its own, Stiltia, meaning long legs. This pratincole raises its leg and shakes it. Another gesture of the pratincole, a little bit like bill scratching. There is also head bobbing and tail rocking. Foot shaking or foot stirring is common with the waders as they stir in the mud to bring up the insects. And the interesting thing about the pratincole is that it does not feed on the shoreline. It is not really a true wader. When the pratincoles come to the pond, they simply stand in the water to cool off and drink copious amounts of water. Remember that these birds are living in a very harsh, dry environment. Water for them is essential. In early spring, the number of pratincoles coming into this pond were few, particularly in the morning, but as the afternoon temperatures increased, so the birds came in increasing numbers. In early spring, the maximum number I saw together was 8. But when the temperatures began to soar at the end of spring, when the birds were nesting in the immediate vicinity, They came in groups of 17. Sometimes I counted 70 birds per hour coming in to stand in the water and drink. The increasing numbers of birds coming into the pond as the external environmental temperature rises tells us that the need for water is proportional to the environmental temperature. And with temperatures above 36, the birds hold their bill open and pant, cooling with the evaporation from the buccal membrane. How do birds survive in these harsh, arid environments? In humans, for instance, we need copious amounts of water. We can't go for more than 3 days without water. The reason for this is that the osmolality of blood, for instance, is 300 milliosmoles per litre, and we can concentrate urine up to 4 times that of our serum, or blood, up to 1200 milliosmoles per litre. Now I say osmolarity, mainly because this reflects the amount of soluble material in the urine. Now, soluble materials in the urine are usually excreted because they are toxic if they get to high levels, for instance like urea, which is the result of protein metabolism and breakdown. So we need to have water so the kidneys can excrete these toxic substances. If the toxic substances increase in our blood because there's no water for excretion, then the result is renal failure. Birds have the ability to reduce the amount of soluble material, particularly urea, in the urine, simply by converting it into uric acid, an insoluble material that will not add to the osmolarity, for it becomes a crystal, produced in the liver and excreted in the hepatobiliary system into the gut. Now, uric acid, we all know, causes things like gout and kidney stones, but the birds can do this and excrete the uric acid so that the amount of water that the bird needs in these dryland climates is reduced dramatically. Now, it's not as though this system has evolved. It has always been there, purely regulated by genetic expression of genes. Other dryland birds also visited this pond. They included the glass and some of the other cetaceans, and here I've left them up so you can get an idea of the relative size of the Pratincole in relationship to these birds. The one that surprised me here was the Australian native hen. There were 30 of these birds at this small water point. A considerable number considering it's so far west. Out of all these birds that we've looked at that were also visiting the pond, the longest stay of any of them was the Pratincole. Sorry, that is a little incorrect. There were a pair of white-necked herons that did stay for a whole afternoon. It wasn't unusual for the Pratincoles to stand in the water, keeping their feet wet, for 10 to 15 minutes. Whereas the cockatiels would come in, have a drink. 10 seconds later, they had taken off. The budgies were even quicker. The Pratincoles treated the pond as an experience. Maybe it was their way to heritage. It seemed the enjoyment was purely the water. There was no evidence of shoreline foraging or other charadriform behaviour. The only feeding I saw these birds do at this little pond was aerial attack of insects, what I suspect are flying ants. I guess it is hawking, but it was done from a standing position. And again. There are always more insects at a pond, and one would think perhaps that the birds would be attracted, but this aerial feeding was an exception. The greater majority of the birds enjoyed just standing in the water or having a bath on a hot day. The Australian Pratincole is often first sighted at the edge of a road or on the road, particularly if it's dirt. Here they forage for insects because the insects are exposed. Approaching a Pratincole like this on the side of a road usually results in a response by the bird in walking away. When they're not in breeding mode, it's said that they fly away more often. When they walk in a hurry. Their legs move quickly, so often this bird is referred to as a road runner. The head bobbing and tail rocking make it apparent that I can see this bird, and what it is doing is leading me away. A little bit like the broken wing trick of many birds trying to distract a predator away from a potential nesting site. Being springtime, when the wind wasn't blowing, one could hear the birds calling out in the grassland. Closer to the pond, so the calls were more vigorous, mainly because the bird density here was higher. When the wind wasn't blowing, one could hear the birds calling out in the grassland. Closer to the pond, so the calls were more vigorous, mainly because the bird density here was higher. Counting birds as I walked along the track that were on the road or immediately adjacent to it, I counted 40 birds within 200 metres on either side of the pond. After 2 kilometres from the pond, I only found birds at approximately every 1 kilometre. After 5 kilometres, they were non-existent. They need the proximity of water. Because the birds didn't fly and tended to walk at a rapid pace, I suspect that I was being led up the garden path, so as to speak, for most of these birds were in breeding mode, and the partner, not attending the nest or the chick, walked very quickly, leading me away from the nest. Stopping for a pause to photograph, the bird would usually stop and then wait until I made a decision whether to walk towards it or away from it. Whatever decision, it was determined to lead me away from the nest. Now let us turn our minds to flight, for the Pratincole has most unusual wings. Firstly, their wing beat is at a rapid rate. They are fast, so what we need to do is put everything into slow motion. The wing has a forward projection to the wrist, with the primary feathers then rolling backwards and tapering. They frequently call in flight, and the calls sound very similar to what the calls are on the ground when one bird talks to another. And so the Pratincole can maximise on Newton's laws giving thrust and Bernoulli's principle of lift, and the tapering of the wings giving minimal drag. In flight they are constantly beating their wings, so they are not geared up for a long range flight. Their north to south breeding migration is filled with stops. Their flight is generally purposeful, in direction as though setting a course. But occasionally, in flight, they do these amazing turns that defy flight principles. Sharp in-flight turns suggest the Pratincole is hawking, but I have never seen them catch an aerial insect in flight. Takeoff is classical. Flexion, then extension of the legs, the wings go into a vertical position, and then the forward thrusting motion. Landing is always fabulous to watch with these birds. Being a light bird with large wings, they make it graceful. From a rapid flight speed to a suddenly standing still motion is just incredible. Tail rocking is very prominent when they land, as if to just check their balance on terra firma. Feeding seems to be opportunistic, taking insects from wherever they may be standing, with occasional hawking, but only from the ground. Now let's get out of spring and head north and go up to Winton in winter, so we can compare the difference in plumage between the breeding and non-breeding phases. In essence, the colour of the bird is very flat from a side view. Back to the more contrasting bird, down south when they are breeding. In early spring, in the outback, when all those prickly bushes are in flower, these birds come in pairs. Mating seemed to happen of an evening, and the first suggestion of any mating were calls, and then look at this, the head bobbing increased, as did the tail rocking. Apart from head bobbing, there were no pre-mating rituals, but both birds were putting out calls. The mating calls are much lower pitched before they rise. Finally, the invite to mount and copulation occurs. Unfortunately, it's near dark, so it's hard to tell any difference in appearance from the male to the female. The calls are different, as is the sonogram. They are far more basal. As they separate, it is suggestive that the male is a more contrasting bird. The nest of these birds is generally a simple scrape in the ground, this bird sitting just south of Mount Isa. Again in the outback of New South Wales, it was apparent that these birds are in breeding mode. You can see the pair, with one of them walking away, calling, trying to get me to follow to distract from going towards the nest. Now the outback is a harsh environment, and breeding in situations like this is extremely difficult. It's 36 degrees. The kangaroos have all been trying to find shade, but because I'm photographing, you can see that they're standing upright in an attentive mode. And the emus, look at them running, and the horizon is just a shimmer. And here, there is a toll for the Pratincole. Some of the chicks do not survive. After the harsh environment, feral cats would next be on the list to threaten these birds. Feral cat numbers in the outback are very high, and as these Pratincoles are ground nesting birds, they are extremely exposed to feral predation. Doing a survey of the Australian Pratincole on the dirt road in the immediate vicinity of the dam, I was amazed when I saw all these emus walking towards me, but the reason I had stopped and photographed them was that there was a Pratincole calling, a distress call caused by my proximity to the nest. Old Man Emu and his chicks walked away, but the other emus kept coming forwards. Then I realised the Pratincole was doing a distress call, and if you look carefully down the bottom, there is the chick. The only thing I could do is walk away and hope that the bird would stop calling, and fortunately it did. Distress calls of any bird is well known to predator birds like butcher birds. In this case, the distress call is attracting the emus, suggesting they are aware that a feed is available, but the emu is a very fickle bird. Emus like the grassy plains because they eat grass, but they are omnivorous and would easily take a small chick, as this response to a distress call suggests. The emu population has increased dramatically out west. They are hardy birds. Their feathers are designed so that they can tolerate extreme heat. The loose feather structure working like an air conditioner. With the Australian Pratincole, I hope that its numbers are also increasing. Sighting reports in 2024 suggest that the bird population of pratincoles is diminishing, but what I have seen in the outback suggests otherwise, and I can only hope that this bird is sustainable. The immediate concerns are 1. Feral cats, and 2. Climate change. At this point, our commentary will stop. We will leave you with some shots of the pratincoles in their own habitat. We trust you've enjoyed this video. Do the usual things, click the likes and subscribe, etc., so we can bring you more videos of Australian birds in the wild.